There couldn't be a more popular Premier in the country than Emperor McGowan. Just look at the last West Australian election. Now, I can't stand this guy. I can't stand the way that he runs things, but pretty successful when you can win all but 2 seats in the lower house of Parliament, right? Now, in part, all of this has been, of course, the chest beating and carrying on about how awesome his healthcare system is, how amazing their COVID response has been. Just ask him.
Our extra cautious approach has worked. We've kept COVID out, protecting people's lives. We have come so far here in WA, there is no point in taking unnecessary risks.
Thank you for keeping us safe. Now, Western Australia was very slow to the party. In August of last year is when QR codes started to roll out in places like New South Wales. Well, Facebook tells us that it was November 26 of 2020 when the West Australian Premier decided to start to publicise the idea of a SafeWA app, among other things, mandatory contact tracing. And he says in this particular thing, and well done to a Channel 7 journalist who pointed this out today, that data will be encrypted at the point of capture, stored securely, and only be accessible by authorised Department of Health contact tracing personnel should COVID-19 contact tracing be necessary. Because you remember, 12 months ago, there was a little concern from people about, will I get this app, will I sign in? I don't want people to be tracking everywhere that I'm going. Despite the fact that, of course, if you have something like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of those things, they're tracking you anyway. But government went out of its way to tell us, no, this is not a tracking app. Well, in Western Australia, despite the fact that they were months late to the party in terms of coming up with one of these apps and months late in coming to the party when it came to the QR codes specifically, guess what happened? Western Australia Police have used the information that comes from the contact tracing app to investigate criminals. Now, does anyone begrudge police using tools to be able to get bad guys? No. Do bad guys deserve their moment in front of a court? You betcha. But when they have gone out of their way to say, hey, everyone, this is not a tracking app. This is definitely not a tracking app, trust us. Well, you can't, because in Western Australia, they lied. Now, we understand that in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, everywhere else, this is not a loophole. But this bloke, who essentially was able to win a massive majority in the Western Australian Parliament by putting his feet on the desk and serving the middle finger to the rest of the country because China was buying iron ore, despite the fact that the people who were digging up the iron ore were FIFO workers from interstate who were barred from seeing their families for months. People didn't care. Most people in Western Australia didn't seem to care either, because thanks for keeping us safe. Despite the fact that the actual health system that they were taking care of in Western Australia saw the amount of people who were delayed getting into an emergency ward got worse and worse and worse and worse in the 5 months leading up to the election. But I know, who cares? All old news. But it matters. When government tries to introduce something that people are cautious about and they go out of their way to say, this will not be misused. And there's not one, but 2 examples of how it was misused. And trust us now, because we're going to go back into the Parliament and with no opposition and with no oversight, we're going to fix the problem. I'm sorry, I don't care how popular this guy is, I don't trust him. And I don't trust his government. So as this story was bubbling along, it was time for Mark McGowan to change the subject and start ranting again about Canberra. Because remember, what do Palaszczuk, Andrews and the Emperor all have in common? Their first love is the Labor Party. The main point of the Labor Party in the next 12 months is to unseat the Morrison government. If 1 or 2 seats can be lost in Western Australia, in Victoria or Queensland, then the chances of Scott Morrison winning an election and winning it with a majority, they disappear. So this bloke who built up all of the cred for how good is our COVID response, who put a system in place that definitely wasn't a tracking device, but ended up being used by police to identify movements of people. Sure, people who deserve to go before a court. But still the idea that somebody other than contact tracers was looking into it? Don't believe this guy. But he decided today that it was time to start ranting about Canberra, to start ranting about China again, because the last time he did that, pretty much most of the West Australian media, which loves licking this guy's boots, just went for the angle of Perth versus Canberra. How good is that? And that's how he tried to distract from this app failure today.
The WA government supports strong and friendly trading relationships with our largest trading partners. As a country, we can and should have a good relationship with our largest trading partner, China. It's in our security and economic interests to do so. The federal talk of conflict or trade retaliation can and must stop.
Distraction, distraction, distraction. The position the federal government has is the same one now the G7 has. The position that you have when it comes to your social distancing and contact tracing app, something you might have to reconnect with the public. But the chance is the public won't know about this mistake because the media covers up for him all the time, every time.